Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are really happy you are here today. Thank you for being here from more than 50 countries all over the world. And about today's teacher, about today's speaker, I would like to tell you that she's 30 years experienced English teachers in primary, secondary, and tertiary education, a teacher trainer, a linguist, and a remarkable author. Penny Orr was educated at the universities of Oxford, where she obtained her master's degree, at Cambridge, her postgraduate certificate in education, and in writing, her MA in TOEFL. She immigrated to Israel in 1967, where she still lives today. She is married and has got a big family with 4 children and 11 grandchildren. Now retired, she has taught courses at bachelor and master level at Oranim Academic College of Education and also in Haifa University, and has lectured extensively at language teachers conferences worldwide. She's interested in all aspects of language teaching methodology, or in particular in issues of vocabulary and grammar in language teaching, language learning activity design, and more recently, English as an international language and the place of research as a source of professional knowledge. She was for 10 years the editor of the Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers series. I'm sure that you know a lot of her books include grammar practice activities, vocabulary activities, a course in English language teaching, discussion, and more. Professor Orr was awarded. She received the OBE Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for her work as an English language teacher. Oh my God. So we are really honored to welcome Professor Penny Orr.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Right. So I'm going to show my PowerPoint screen. Let me know if you can see it okay. Right, so 30 teaching tips. Okay, we seem to be going now, and I can see the chat box, so I'm moving on. 30 teaching tips. These are sort of practical teaching tips, mainly from my own experience. Some also I've used a bit of the research occasionally, and things I've learned from colleagues and things I've learned from students, things I've learned from other teachers around the world. So obviously there are hundreds and hundreds of teaching tips. These are just a selection which I hope you'll find helpful. I've focused here both on general and online, because a lot of us are doing a lot of our teaching online now. And for the foreseeable future, we're going to have to carry on at least partly doing online. Personally, I much prefer teaching face-to-face, and I think students learn better that way. But the situation being what it is, we're going to have to carry on doing online teaching as well, if not only. For many of us, I'm sure a lot of you are doing online work now. So what I've done during these tips is the tips that are specific to online are marked in green, and the ones that are only face-to-face work in orange, and ones that will work for either are in the normal blue. I'll remind you as you go along, and you can see it as you go. So we'll start off with lesson planning. And my tip number 1 is write out your lesson plan. I've been teaching, as I've told you, for 30 years, and I still, to this day, write out my lesson plan before I go into a lesson. PowerPoint does it for me, which is very useful. I mean, I use PowerPoint as my lesson plan when I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation, but when I'm just doing ordinary face-to-face teaching English in the classroom, I just have a lesson plan at my elbow. Even if I don't look at it, the fact that I've written it out gives me the confidence and helps me remember what I'm going to do. So very brief notes. I'm not in favor of writing out long essays for your lesson plan because you'll never have time to look at it anyway, but brief notes of what you're going to do, what order, timing, the pages you're going to do, exercises, that sort of thing. Tip number 2, which is following on this one, is include a reserve. When you make a lesson plan, include a reserve. What you're going to put in if you have time, and the other way around, what you'll leave out if you find you're short of time. Tip number 3, also to do with lesson planning, is share your agenda at the beginning of the lesson. I'm very much in favor of sharing things with students altogether. You'll see later tips on student orientation, but for the moment, just to get to do with lesson planning, share your agenda at the beginning of the lesson. To tell students at the beginning of a lesson, this is what we're going to do, and what I do in a face-to-face lesson is put it up on the whiteboard or blackboard, but it's very easy to simply display it on the screen if you are doing it face-to-face, online. Remember the online in green, the face-to-face in orange. So have this sort of to-do. This is what I'm planning to do. I might not get through it, but this is what we're planning to do so that the students know where you're going. Tip number 4 is all to do with online Zoom lessons. And what I've learned, I've been teaching Zoom now for the last 3 or 4 months, as I suppose a lot of us have. And this is what I found. Firstly, that you have to keep the lessons shorter. Much more difficult to concentrate online face-to-face. To teach new material at the beginning, activate as much as you can. I'm going to deal with each of these points in a separate slide now, so you'll see what I'm saying. Keep online lessons shorter. What does short mean? Well, it's difficult even for adults to concentrate for more than an hour online. I found with my master's students that after an hour they found that they weren't able to concentrate well, and if face-to-face sessions were an hour and a half, the online ones couldn't be longer than an hour, hour and a quarter maximum. Children probably less. So, and particularly if they've got a whole day spending looking at their screen doing online lessons, it's really, really difficult to have long ones. As I said, teach difficult or new stuff at the beginning. And this is true for any lesson, not just online, but online even more so because of the problem of concentration. So leave the fun, less demanding tasks for later in the lesson. If you're going to teach, say, grammar, then it's a good idea to do this right at the beginning. If you're going to teach a new text, then teach it at the beginning. If you're going to do a game or a song, leave it for later. And 4C, so we're still on the problem of concentration. Get students to be as active as possible. I did a feedback session with my students at the end of the year on the Zoom sessions, and this is one of the things they told me, which was really, really useful. When you get us to be active, get us to respond, we find it much easier to concentrate. If it's just you talking, it's much, much more difficult. So what I tell them is, if I've got a class of, say, up to 15, which is a very small class, of course, but if I have a small class, then turn on your microphones, have them on the whole time, and don't worry about coming in and speaking. In a session like this one with hundreds and hundreds of participants, it's just not feasible. But if you've got a small class, it is, and it doesn't matter that much if they interrupt each other, interrupt you. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Ask them to use cameras. One of my teachers said to me, yes, but teenagers don't like to turn on their cameras. It's true, some of them don't, but as much as they can. Yes, it's really nice, for instance, in this session to see your faces while I'm speaking. But using the chat box for responses, let students, and I'd really be happy for anyone just to comment on anything I'm saying as I'm going. I might not be able to respond very quickly, but it's nice to be able to see that people are actually responding to what I'm saying. And polls are a useful tool in Zoom. I don't know how many of you have used them. I just learned to use them very recently, and they're surprisingly easy to use and get students to vote for an opinion or an idea or a preference. It's really useful. Breakout rooms, which I'll talk about again later, it's for group work. Okay, on to tip number 5. Tip number 5 for lesson planning is end with something nice. Send them away from the lesson with a smile on their faces. This is the principle, I suppose. Finish the lesson with a smile. So you can do it all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to be a joke. It doesn't have to be, certainly you want to smile yourself. But one of the ways of doing this is to summarize, demonstrating what they've achieved. Look, guys, this is what we've done today. This is what we've achieved. You can feel pleased with yourselves. So if you're doing it online, you can have a summary slide. This is what we did. You can even pick up your plan at the beginning and say, look, this and this and this is what we've managed to get through. Well done, us. Mentimeter, yes, Matilda mentioned Mentimeter. It's a really nice tool. You have to pay for it if you use it beyond the very basic tools they give you, but it's a real, or numbers, I think, but it's a nice tool. Polls are lovely, yes. And Gauri says use tools in Zoom a couple of times. Nice. Yeah. So a summary slide at the end. Congratulate or prove what they've done. Congratulations, guys. And on a lighter note, a short story or joke. Play a quick game. And if you are using Zoom, you can even put in a quick clip, a song or joke or story, sort of a 2-minute YouTube, something called unboxing, which I discovered recently, which is really fun and very quick. Okay, let's go on to my tips on homework. Unless anybody wants to respond to anything I've said up to now, I'll pause for a second. Someone wants to write anything? Get students as active as possible. Yes, I agree. That's the thing. Not necessarily group work, not necessarily collaborating, but being active, feeling that they are part of the lesson, not just passive recipients of the lesson. Unboxing, what is unboxing? I'm going to leave that to someone else. You look it up on the internet. Yeah, much more difficult with young learners, I agree. Okay, let's carry on with homework. Thinking out of the box, yes. Okay. Tip 6. Okay, if we can disengage ourselves from unboxing and all the other things. Don't give homework at the end of the lesson. Nearly all teachers that I've observed give homework at the end of the lesson. It's sort of the default convention. And it's a bad idea for various reasons, and whether it's online or face-to-face. Firstly, you may not have time to explain properly. Do you have bells in Latin America at the end of a lesson, or a buzzer or something which stops you? But anyway, you have a time limit. If you give your homework at the end of the lesson, you might not have time to explain properly. They might not have time to write it down. They might not have time to ask questions, which is quite important, because very often I explain something and it's clear to me, and I don't realize that actually it's not so clear to the students. And I need them to tell me it's not so clear. Please, can you explain this or this? I see what they're saying. Does anyone remember tip 2? I've sent this a PowerPoint to Abigail for uploading onto the Uribe website, so you'll be able to see all the tips later. And if you can't, I'm going to give you my email at the end of this session. You simply write me an email and I'll send it to you. So don't worry if you've missed something. You'll be able to look at it again. Another important point about giving homework at the end is if you give homework at the end, the message is, this is not so important. It's coming right at the end. It's less important, and homework is vitally important. And if I give it earlier in the lesson, that also helps to reinforce the message that it's important. Okay, homework again. Find ways to check homework without wasting half the lesson. I have often watched lessons, observed lessons where teachers actually spent half the lesson checking yesterday's homework without getting onto their lesson plan at all, and it's a terrible waste of time. There are other alternatives, and I'm going to suggest some now. Student ping pong is time consuming anyway, even more if you do it online. The other options are, one is simply dictate the answers and students self-check if it's an exercise which has answers, which very often is what we're giving, or show the answers on the board or on the screen and students check themselves, or put them into small groups or breakout rooms, say check each other, go through the exercise, see what you got right, and then we'll come back together. Ask me if there's any problem. Otherwise, I'll assume that you've managed to check yourselves. And it saves time, it's more interactive, and it's just as effective in checking homework. Okay, my next few tips have to do with questioning. When you ask a question, it's very, very important to allow what's called wait time. Not to jump at the first student who raises their hand or the first student who answers, but tell students, I'm going to wait. I want you to think about your answers and I'll ask you in a second or two. So allow wait time. So don't nominate the first student to raise their hand. Or on Zoom, I don't know how many of you use this, there's a raise hand option. You can ask students to raise their hands. There's an icon at the bottom of the screen where they can vote, and you can say to them, I'm waiting to see at least 5 people raise their hands, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face. I want to see 5 people, and then I'll ask for the answer. Because some people think more slowly, some people think more thoroughly. Some students, particularly the less confident ones, won't raise their hand immediately, and you want to give them a chance to answer. So tip 8, allow wait time. Okay, or ask everyone to write in their response in the box and check it there, chat box, check them as they see them. I'll come back to that in a moment. That was actually a displaced slide. Tip number 9, echo responses. A student says something, a lot of us do it automatically. A student gives an answer, and I simply repeat what the student said. As it's called echoing. And I think some researchers say it's not a good thing to do. I think it's an excellent thing to do for various reasons. For one thing, you can do it in 2 ways, of course. If you're teaching face-to-face, then you simply repeat what they said, or you read, as I've done a couple of times already, from the chat box, what someone has said, repeat it, and that has various functions. Firstly, to make sure everybody hears it, or everybody's noticed if it's in the chat box. Secondly, to confirm, yes, this is right, this is a good thing to say. I want to make sure that you know that this is right. Thirdly, simply for the sake of the repetition, if it was an interesting response or a response in good English and you want students to hear it again, to correct. Sometimes I can, in my echo, I can correct a mistake and draw students' attention to it. And finally, and not less important, the fact that you repeat a student's response or draw attention to it in the chat box is an indirect compliment to the student. Yes, your response was important enough to me for me to want to say it myself. And it's a sort of compliment, it's a nice thing to do. Okay, let's move on. Tip number 10, make questions open-ended as often as you can. Open-ended means lots and lots of answers. So for example, closed-ended, what's the opposite of wide? There's only one answer, narrow, okay? Open-ended, how many things can you think of that can be wide or narrow? And there's lots and lots of right answers, and you are still practicing the 2 adjectives wide and narrow, but you're allowing students to give lots and lots of answers. And for various reasons. I'll come back to this later in a tip about interest. It's more interesting. You get much more participation. You ask an open-ended questions, lots of answers. Closed-ended, only one answer, so lots more participation. And the weaker students are more likely to participate because if the stronger students answer first, they sort of provide a model and they give the weaker students time to think, and they can come up with their answers later. So you get more response also from your weaker students. What open-ended is, it's written on the slide, Gladys. Sorry, Mariella. It's on the slide. It has a question with lots and lots of right answers. Okay, thank you. See, someone else has answered you. I don't need to answer the questions. There's always someone of the audience who will answer for me. Thank you. Tip 11. Don't always insist on teacher-nominated responses. This is a tricky one. Normally, what we do is we call out a question and the students raise their hands and we nominate one student to answer. Okay? What I call ping pong. That's the normal kind of interaction in the classroom, not only in language classes, in any subject almost. But sometimes it's a good idea just to tell students to call out or write in answers as fast as they can. And you pick them up and echo them or write up all the answers you hear as quickly as you can. You can't, if you're doing this kind of uncontrolled brainstorm where they get lots and lots of answers, you won't be able to pick them all up. But you pick up as many as you can. And the advantages are that you get much, much more participation. Again, particularly the weak students. The shy students will respond under the shelter, as it were, of the others. If everybody's calling out answers, then I won't be drawing attention to myself and I can call out my own answer as well. There is less teacher control. That's the price you pay, but in my opinion, it's worth it for the wider activation. I'm not saying never say never anyway, I'll come on to that later, but I'm not saying never nominate a single student to answer, but I'm saying that there is an option of simply throwing it open and letting them answer as quickly as they can, as much as they can. I'll give some more examples later. Okay, make it interesting. My tip number 12 is something I call mutilate the textbook. Don't feel that because something's written in the textbook to do it in a particular way, you therefore have to do it the way the author said. You're a teacher, you're a professional. You can change the textbook and do it so that it's more interesting for your students. Allow yourself to change or delete or add to a textbook exercise to make it more interesting. I'm going to show you an example. And I want you to look at, there's 4 different ways of doing an exercise. I'm going to do an exercise 4 different ways, which involve actually changing the textbook exercise. And I want you to tell me whether you found each, and you can write this in the chat box or write on a bit of paper and just remember what you wrote, whichever is more convenient, or just think, you don't have to write it down even. But for each of the 4 ways, I want you to say if you found it very interesting, fairly interesting, or boring. I mean, roughly speaking. Okay, so here's number 1. It's an exercise on irregular past. Write in the correct form. So, she left early, he made, okay? Everybody's saying boring. Okay, you got the idea. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I've got my vote there. Finish the sentence any way you like. And again, I'm practicing the past forms left, made, sat, and read, and I want them to answer it any way you like. So for she left, can anyone give me an answer? She left, how might you finish that? She left. For example, she left the room. She left her husband. She left in a hurry. She left 2 minutes ago. Okay, this is open-ended, right? I've made it open-ended. I'm getting a lot more responses and I am getting a lot more practice of the target item. But my question is, how interesting is this? Is this more or less interesting than the previous one? left without saying goodbye. Nice. One nice thing about open-ended questions is, of course, you can get answers at different levels. So left the room is very simple. Left without saying goodbye, with a gerund in it, is a very advanced answer. So you've got a latitude for your more advanced or less advanced students to answer according to their ability. So that was number 2. Number 3, she, and I'm saying you can put in any verb you like, but the end of the sentence has to say the same. So can you suggest what you might do with, say, number 2, he the cake? What might you say instead of he made the cake? Ate. Okay, he ate the cake, he baked the cake, he ruined the cake, he burned the cake. Okay, stole the cake, prepared. Yeah, lots and lots of answers there. Again, open-ended, much more interesting. And what you're getting here is one step on. Enjoyed the cake, devoured. That's an advanced student saying devoured the cake. You're getting practice in more past forms. Having done it the conventional way, you're then allowing students to contribute other past forms they know, and of course the more advanced one will have more advanced ones, and the less ones will have easier ones. But anyhow, so how interesting was that? Interesting, boring, fairly interesting. It poisoned the cake, says someone. More interesting. Yes. Very interesting, fairly interesting, interesting, more interesting. Okay, let's try the next one. Create a sentence that is true for you. Now I need you to do this, okay? Using the target forms, but making a sentence which is true for you. Can someone put in a suggestion here? I left the building. Thank you. I left my wife. I read Persuasion. I read the chat. I left for good. Wow, I left my country. Yes, so did I. I made a mistake. Very nice, lovely. And it's all true for you. Okay, how interesting is that? Okay, can you write in? Read all Jane Austen's book. Yes, so did I. Left my boyfriend. Highly interesting. So this is more interesting, isn't it? Probably the most interesting of them all. What made the later exercises more interesting? Thank you very much for your participation in this. My original plan was to make this into a poll, but I think the way we did it through the chat box is actually better than a poll. What made the later exercises more interesting, seriously? I'm going to, you're probably, yes, meaningful. Someone's already written that in. First of all, meaningful. The original one, if you remember, you could do it mechanically. You didn't have to read the sentence even. You just took the root verb and made it into the past. But all the others, you had to know what you were saying, so it was meaningful. Personalization, someone's saying, yes. Open-ended, I've mentioned. You'll be sick of me saying open-ended by the end of this lecture. Personal, several of you have said this, yes. It's real communication, it's saying real things, communicative, I didn't mention that. It also higher order thinking skills, thinking about, yes, what other things can you leave? What things can you leave? What can you do with a cake other than make it? So it's creative thinking and sometimes even lateral thinking. So all these things make an exercise more interesting, and the principle is, as I said, to be willing to change the original text and do other things with it, not do it exactly the same way the textbook writer expected, but to make it open-ended. Let's move on. Correcting mistakes. Correct students yourself rather than ask them to correct each other. It's an interesting one. Some teachers think you should ask students to correct each other, but actually I did a survey on this with some of my teachers. I asked them to ask students if they preferred to be corrected by the teacher to correct each other, and overwhelmingly they said, I want the teacher to correct me. And my teachers said, oh, this is because they're embarrassed or distressed or just feel uneasy about being corrected by or correcting each other. and they went back and asked their students, why did you say you prefer the teacher to correct you rather than your friends? And the answer from the majority was, I prefer the teacher to correct me because I know she's going to correct me right. I rely on the teacher. So when you're asking students to correct each other, think about this. Again, it's a never say never thing. There may be places where you, particularly for peer editing, things like that, where you want the students to help each other get it right. But on the whole, if a student makes a mistake, on the whole, it's useful to know that most students prefer to be corrected by the teacher. Another thing about making mistakes and correcting is that it's useful sometimes to correct without a mistake. In other words, a student got it right. Look, they got it right. This was a difficult thing to get right, and she did it or he did it. We take right answers for granted, and perhaps we shouldn't, because what we notice is when students get it wrong, not when students get it right. And perhaps we should notice when students get it right and draw attention, give them credit to get other students to notice. It's like echoing, and if you give the student's name in your response, then that gives the compliment to the student, as we would like to do. Another very important tip about correcting is don't just do what's called recast. In other words, if a student says he go to school, the teacher says he goes to school. And that's it. It's just a quick recast, which a lot of us do because we don't want to spend all our time spending time on correcting, and we do a quick recast. The problem is that students sometimes don't notice the correction. There is actually research to show that a recast, the very quick correction like this, just giving the correct form, is not very effective in getting students to notice and take on board the correction. And it is actually better. Yes, making mistakes is part of their learning process. I absolutely agree, Carlos. And it's important to do the correction. I'm in favor of correcting, but we do need to draw attention to the correction. So when a student says he go to school, it's not really enough to say he goes to school in most cases. You need to do other things, like, for example, he goes, tell them they're wrong. He goes, say that again, get the student to repeat. Or he, and get the student to self-correct. Or I say he goes, are you sure that's right? You know, making a face, and the student again, self-correct. Self-correction is really much better than just the teacher correcting, because then you know the student has noticed it and got the right form. Or you might just say you made a mistake. Quite frankly, honestly, you made a mistake, can you correct yourself? Or remind them of the rule about the third person S. Tip 16, do sometimes correct during fluent speech. It follows on from the last one. You may have been advised not to interrupt students when they're in the middle of speaking in a communication activity, but there are situations where it's helpful to do so. Obviously not when the student is in full spate or is very shy, or you really want to encourage them, you don't want to interrupt them, but it's not an always or never thing. There is some indication that students like to be corrected as they go. I'll come on to that in a moment, but there's a sort of paradox here. If you do a very quick, unobtrusive recast, we've already seen the student may not notice it. If you don't correct, they certainly won't correct themselves. If you correct more effectively using explicit feedback and processing, as in the examples I gave on the previous slide, we may damage the communicative value of the activity. So it's, what are you going to do? And the answer is each mistake, you need to take it on its merits and decide whether you are going to correct or not, depending on how bad the mistake was, how confident the student is, how much you're going to interrupt the flow. It's a quick decision. The point I'm trying to make here is it's not an always or never thing. And there is some evidence that immediate corrective feedback is more effective than delayed feedback. And there is some evidence that if you ask the learners themselves, they say, I want you to interrupt me. It's a good tip, incidentally, to ask the students, what do you prefer? How do you prefer? Okay, another set of tips now on student orientation. Sorry I'm going so fast, but this is 30 tips in an hour is quite a challenge, and you'll be able to see the slides later and go through them at your leisure and remind yourselves. Gabriella says, I usually write down the mistakes and correct them later. Yes, that's an alternative. But as I say, a lot of students prefer to be corrected as they're going, and there is some evidence that it's more effective. So it's an alternative. It's not an always or never thing. Tip 17, elicit expectations or requests in the beginning. Really useful at the beginning of the course, even with young learners. What do you want from this course? What do you expect? What do you particularly dislike doing in English lessons? Any special requests? And either they can write in the chat box, or they can send you a note, or you can just have an open discussion. But it's really, really helpful to get this advanced feedback, as it were. You don't have to do everything they ask, of course, and sometimes they'll contradict each other, but it's useful to hear what they want. Share goals. We're beginning a course. This is what I want to achieve. So it's not only what do you want, but also, look, guys, I'm being fairly open with you. This is what I hope to achieve in the course as a whole. This is why I'm doing a particular activity. This is why I'm giving this homework. I talked about sharing right at the beginning of the presentation. I think it's really important to share with students where I'm at, what I'm doing, where I'm going, and why, and what I hope you'll gain from whatever. And tip 19 is get periodic feedback. And the main tip here is don't wait until the end of the course. Sometimes we get feedback from our students at the end of this course, and it's really too late, because if I'm doing something really badly wrong, I need to know quickly so that I can set it right. And if I'm doing something good, I need to know so that I can make the most of it. And really, really important there. Yes, Hugo has a nice entry there about what they do at the beginning of their course. And it's the same principle as I said before. Yeah. I get them to tell you what's helped them learn. I ask them 4 questions. What's helped them learn? What hasn't helped them? And do they have any particular suggestions to help you? Okay? Not, did I enjoy the lessons? We're not into teaching simply for the enjoyment. Enjoyment helps. We are into teaching because for the sake of the learning. We want the students to learn. What has helped you learn? What hasn't helped you? And what can I do to make your learning better? And finally, so that it's not all me, it's also you, in the middle of the course, when you're getting your feedback, what can I, the student, do? It's not just the teacher's responsibility, it's a shared responsibility, and I want the students to say what they can do, what responsibility they can do to make the course better. Okay, activation. We talked about this earlier. Really important to activate all or most of the students. We're going to talk about teacher talk now, which is also important. So it's activating and being active yourself, obviously. Avoiding one at a time questioning. Use as much as you can tasks that have all the students responding simultaneously. It's what I talked about earlier. That's why the open-ended questions are so good. So lots of them raise their hands, or lots of them call out, or lots of them write in the chat box. And you get lots of activation rather than the one ping pong, teacher asks, student answers, teacher corrects, which is very boring and does not activate all the students simultaneously. Some will simply opt out and don't do anything when you're doing that sort of ping pong interaction. So options that involve all or many students. Here's just a quick a few ideas. Free response main form, written responses like a dictation. So they're all writing, they're all responding. Responding by a signal. If it's face-to-face, they can raise their hands or thumbs up or thumbs down for yes or no. or a quick yes/no response in the chat box, and they're all active. And two techniques which belong, polls, I've already said, two techniques which belong only to the face-to-face, which you might not have used. Mingling is when students get up, meet a partner, any partner, ask them a question or exchange ideas on a task you've given. Says thank you, breaks off, meets another student, asks the same question, gets the same, gets some interaction, break off, meet another student, and so on. So it's mingling in order to speak to as many students as possible, and they're all active. Pass it on is also for face-to-face only, where, let's take an example. I've got a sheet of adjectives, and I want the students to write in the opposites to all the adjectives. Right? This is just an example, but you can do it really with any exercise you like. I tell the students, write in 4 opposites. It can be the first 4 or the last 4, or any 4 you like on the sheet. But when you've written in 4 opposites, raise your paper in the air, find someone else who has finished and is raising the paper in the air, exchange with them, write another 4. When you've done that, raise again, exchange again, and so on. And what happens is that the papers are moving from student to student. As soon as a student finishes the 4, or however many it is, they raise their paper and exchange, and all the students are active all of the time, exchanging, adding, and as I say, you can do it with any exercise. Fill in 2 answers to this exercise, raise your paper, and exchange with someone else. Or alternatively, do as much as you can until I say stop, then exchange with the person next to you, and then do as much as you can until I say stop. But the principle is passing on to the person next to you. So it's a nice tip for face-to-face. Hopefully some of us will be teaching some face-to-face in the near future. Okay, reading. It helps to vary genres of reading texts. A lot of textbooks, one of my complaints with textbooks is that a lot of them use very limited types of text. They tend to be informative texts or stories or dialogues, and it's really useful, and the internet can allow us to find lots and lots of different alternatives. For example, I'm not going to read these out, but just skim down and see all the ones that are here. All sorts of different kinds of prose text, which the textbooks don't usually give us, but which are easily downloaded and simplified from the internet. Emails, yes, you've said. Information display, a new kind of text which is still not being used enough, in my view, in the textbooks. So all these things you can see here. They're not a sequential prose or paragraphs as in the conventional text, but they are reading text, and they're helped by the layout. So all these different kinds of text as well. And another kind of text which I think is not used enough is brief texts. And again, I'm going to just display all these kinds of things, very, very brief. They're good for fillers as well. Again, the books don't use them enough, and they're very, very rich. Short slogans, quotations, headings, street signs, and so on, which you can use to supplement your textbook. Tweets, thank you. Yes, tweets is another, which I should have added. I'll do that next time I give this. Tip 22. It's okay not to pre-teach vocabulary for a text. We're told you should pre-teach. It ain't necessarily so. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. The reason why it doesn't is because if you teach vocabulary just before you teach a text, very often they simply don't remember the new words when they come across in the text. You need time to absorb vocabulary, and pre-teaching it doesn't help very much. You do it too soon. Before, if you teach it one lesson in advance. But it's okay not to. This is my message here. To teach the new vocabulary as you go, where it is in context, and remind them later. So, okay not to pre-teach vocabulary. You can, you don't have to. Don't ask students to read round the class, sight read the first time they see a text. Bad idea, although lots of students like doing it, and it's in some cultures it's always done, but I think it's a really bad idea. They'll be concentrating on decoding, and remember, when they're reading English with the quite different spelling from Spanish and different pronunciation, they'll be concentrating on getting the pronunciation right, and won't have the attention to spare for meaning. I'm going to give you a minute to read a text which I have mutilated. I've changed the spelling so it's not so easy to read, but it is in English, and write in the chat box what it's about. 1 minute to find out what it's about. Okay, seconds are ticking away. Actually, I'm going to give you less than a minute because nobody so far has managed to say what the accident. Very nice. Yes, it's about an accident. Anything else? It's a short story, yes, but what's a short story about? Danny was watching a movie. Yeah, right. You got the first sentence. Okay. Something about a movie. A dog, right. Hit and run. Lovely. Okay, but it took you a while. Okay, let me just read it out and then you'll see what it was. Danny was watching a movie when Lucy and Mary came to tell him about his dog Ginger, who'd been playing outside with other dogs when Michael rode by on his motorcycle and ran him over. He was badly hurt, so Danny and Lucy took him to the vet, while Mary phoned the police to tell them about the hit and run. But you can see, my point is that it's really, really difficult to read a text which doesn't have the spelling you're used to, and which is, in this case, as it were, in a foreign language. Tip 24. It's a useful tip to read aloud the text while they follow. If you're doing it online, then you can have the text on screen and use the pointer to show where you are in the text so they're following you. There is, again, some research to show that if the first time they encounter a text, they read it silently while the teacher is reading, this really helps them understand. Teacher talk, I already said teacher talk is a good thing. You may have been told teacher talk is a bad thing. It isn't. It's a good thing, for very often it's the best source of comprehensible input. Of course, students also need to be activated, but lowering teacher talk time, TTT, is not a value in itself. It's good to talk as long as they are also active. Okay. For example, tell stories. Okay, tip 26. They love stories. Not only young students. It's advanced students that also like stories. I like stories. Everybody likes stories. I've often noticed when I'm giving a talk and I say, okay, let me just stop and tell you a story. Everyone sort of jumps to attention and listens, and it raises motivation. People like listening to stories, these sorts of things. Okay, movies, traditional tales, even stories they already know, never mind, they like. I have that picture in my home, yes, a famous picture. Tip 27 about teacher talk. Use L1 if you need to. Don't feel guilty about it, particularly for explaining new vocabulary, explaining grammar, comparing with the L1. You say it in Spanish like this and you say it in English like this. Okay, this is why you're making the mistake. It's useful for you to know why there's a difference, and it really helps understand the English. Okay, make sure you spend most of your time speaking comprehensible English clearly, but it's not terrible to use occasionally the L1 for these various purposes, and I don't want you to feel guilty about it. Okay, 28, group work. If you've got Zoom, use breakout rooms. I used them for the first time a couple of months ago. I was surprised how easy it is to use them. Really, really easy. Easy to get back into full class mode, easy to visit groups to check and help them speak English. So do use this tool, it's really nice. That's my tip 28 on Zoom. Yeah. Yes. Tasks to do in breakout. These are various possible things you can ask them to do in their own breakout rooms. Do a speaking activity like the 10 top most important qualities of a teacher, decide in your breakout rooms and then come back and discuss. Brainstorm all the vocabulary we've learned, find out who is the oldest, youngest, whatever of the group, make up a story, all sorts of things you can do in breakout rooms. You can't spend too long, sort of 5-10 minutes is probably enough, but it's a really useful tool and I recommend it. If you do group work, tell students in advance how the group work will end. So you have 10 minutes, for example, or if you're doing it in face-to-face, then this buzzer will sound at the end. Or if you're doing it online, I'll send you a message, which you can easily do on Zoom when time is almost up. Or I'll stop you when the first group finishes. So, but they need to know in advance how it's going to end and when it's going to end. And it's important to give them this as part of the initial instructions. Okay, guys, tip 30, and I mentioned this earlier, never say never. There are few, if any, tips which always work. There's no such thing as always or never really in teaching. Good teaching depends on knowing what the practical principles, which is what I'm talking about in tips, really. It's another way of saying tips. What the practical principles are that are likely to make learning better, but also knowing when to abandon them. When any particular one in specific circumstances is not going to work and you're going to do the other. So you need to be careful. I mean, I think my tips are really good, but none of them are perfect. None of them will also always apply. And you need to be careful about selecting, adapting, deciding when it's going to work and when it's not going to work. Thank you, everybody. And here's my email for you to, if you want me to send you personally these slides, I can do so, or Abigail, you're going to put them up on the website, right? Okay, so thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Oh,
Abigail,
amazing. Oh, it's wonderful to hear. Yeah, I mean, well, we are going to share your presentation, of course, with all the teachers. And I would like to say that it's really amazing to hear the voice of the books we have studied and read. Thank you so much for sharing. We are really, really, really happy. And I would say that we really appreciate your way, your kind way. I mean, sharing all you know, and I'm sure that everybody has taken notes of the wonderful tips that you have given us today. Thank you very much. Thank you, teachers, for participating, and we will be waiting for you always, okay. Professor Benny. Thank you very much. See you soon. Okay. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, and please feel free to use my email to send questions or comments, as I said. Thank you, Abigail.
Thank you, Miss. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.